Hello, everyone. Welcome to Big Class SASEDay. We just heard a presentation, if you've been with us, by Eugenie of the Herchevac Group on SASE 101, what is SASE? And now we're going to go a bit deeper in our next topic. Our next speaker is John Moran, Managing Partner at NBS Tech Group. John is a recognized expert in technology solutions with advanced expertise in networking and security solutions. John can be described as a pragmatic solution architect for security and network design, whether on premises or in the cloud. With roots as a capacity planner, John is renowned for planning the proper solutions while maximizing performance within given budget constraints. John's a founder of the infrastructure security firm NBS Tech Group almost 30 years ago, and he's had thousands of engagements to analyze and assess over many different architectures while adapting to the multiple waves of security innovations over the past 3 decades. Today, John is going to be speaking on how SASE maps to current and future use cases, as well as share insight on how best to position your SASE security solution for your corporate needs. Now, as you listen to John's presentation, think about the SASE benefits that are being delivered, as we've heard from Nat and Mike and Eugenie. Benefits such as protecting assets wherever they're located, getting the native experience with cloud apps for better performance and increased productivity, and saving money. So John, we're looking forward to hearing your presentation. Take it away.
Thank you, John. Appreciate it. And welcome all. I don't know how many of you have been sitting for a while, but hopefully the little break helped. I'd like to start today by, I'm not getting a click here. Getting my deck to work. There we go. By acknowledging Gartner for changing SASE from a self-addressed stamped envelope to secure access, secure edge. And I think Gartner has wonderful ways of always reinventing acronyms that have had many different meanings from every corner of the universe. But I always like to start presentations with a silly IT trivia challenge. In what year was Nintendo incorporated? And I'll give you 30 seconds to think about it without looking it up online and all these other fun things. But I asked my children this and they said in the 80s. And I said, you're potentially right, but what generation? And it was actually founded in 1889 in Japan, and they made Hanafuda playing cards as the origin of it. And they still have some of the decks that they use for some of their games today. So anyway, just a fun little fact as we approach the holiday season and we look to buy our kids PS4 and a Nintendo and all this other stuff that we know nothing about. Or I don't anyway. I was a Pong guy. Anyway, today's case study, we're going to talk about Casby Corp, and they decided to move some of their hardware resources to the cloud. And historically, or until recently in the last decade of the SaaS revolution, companies had their own private apps and kept them on premises, and that was, pretty much standard operating procedure. As we started to see this lift and shift migration, we saw companies take their private applications and try to lift and shift them into the cloud. And they did it in 2 ways. Historically, it started with the kind of data center hosting and, hey, we'll buy some rack space from you and you manage our power and all this other stuff. And now we're going to the next evolution, which is the AWS and GCP and Azure to have our cloud services kind of run our hardware for us instead of operating and having the capital costs. We've shifted from a capital intensive to an operationally cost intensive. So we've kind of shifted the whole thing. So this is what we're going to talk about today, and how this works in the reality and how it's problematic in some corporations due to the mindset and the mindset shift that needs to happen to modern security technology. So requirements for an on-prem to cloud migration, we kind of bucket it a list of 10. I'll drop them in blocks of 5 before proceeding. One is you always want to maintain a native user experience. How do you get that kind of look and feel that the application is hosted on-prem versus having some latencies and problems by having it in the cloud. Real-time controls for DLP and multi-factor authentication, some sort of IDP and native identity management, SAML, ADFS, and then inline protections for zero-day threats. In addition, you want to have your interoperability with your existing security architecture and ability for the logs to go to your SIM, Splunk, Logarithm, whatever you're using. Some sort of VPN connectivity for machine-to-machine communications, and your appropriate field level and file level encryptions, as well as real-time data protections, regardless of the device type that is accessing the data. Here is the million-dollar question for every company. How does your company define the edge? And if you look at the two lists here, they're kind of self-explanatory, but what we found is as we work in engagements with large multinational companies, the edge is valued so differently and just so wildly differently by each and every stakeholder. You know, many companies still want to have a traditional model because they don't know how or don't have the budget or don't have the corporate buy-in to protect all the different edges. And I think as you'll see that as we go forward in the presentation. Similarly, IT has become so siloed in our corporate world that, you know, the Information Security Office has this herd of silos, if you will, that they have to maintain, right? And advise on and help, whether it's your DNS, your ISP, your ADFS, your firewall, identity management, your apps, your certifications, and your cloud, right? Any of those silos, and there's many more, depending on the corporation you're in and how deep or how detailed each silo is. And they all have their own ideas on security. They all have their own ideas on how, you know, what is best practices for that individual silo. I'll caution all of you as you embark on this migration to make sure that you have a cloud squad or a geek squad or whatever you want to call them to facilitate the liaisons between all of these individual groups. And I probably should have put another loop over there for the HR and data privacy and all the other groups that need to be involved, especially if you're, you know, dealing with GDPR. So in one of my recent engagements, we had company Casby Corp here that wanted to do a lift and shift. What did they do? Of course, they made all their remote users VPN to HQ. They had all their office users through an IPsec tunnel to the data center. And from the data center, they had their Casby Corp IPsec tunnel up to their AWS private cloud. Beautiful, secure in their minds, and, you know, operational. It worked until they had a problem. The users were complaining. They're seeing latencies, 500, 600, 700 milliseconds. Why? They violated the first rule that we talked about back 2 slides ago, which was provide a native user experience. So what did they do? They had this is their original historical security thinking. They had zero public internet access to their cloud app, only through VPN. The design resulted in high latency and the user experience is not met. And this is the most important thing. I mean, this is your asset. This is your corporate asset of the company. You know, this is where the nuts and bolts are. You know, if your users aren't happy and they're not productive, you're not going to get anything done. So with the, you know, latency caused by all of these things, you know, people's home Wi-Fi. I mean, how can you control the latency of that if they have Comcast or Spectrum or any of these coax companies that think 90, 100 milliseconds of latency is okay? How do you combat that? You really can't So you need to kind of redesign your thinking in that aspect. So the redesign was needed. And here's the redesign is you have your users go through the CASB, Corp AWS Private Cloud, through a CASB, SASE with the bit class CASB, SAML IDP, and MFA, which takes care of another few users. And you can leave the IPsec tunnels here for your machine-to-machine communications through your VPCs and your private cloud. Lowered latency, improved performance, improved user experience. You can be cost neutral if you take out the VPN connections that you don't need and all the assets you need for the VPN, because they can access directly. It's a global app. I mean, there's thousands of benefits, and enhanced UBA from the traditional VPN that the users get. So the second thing is that SASE facilitates in their migration requirements is data protection. And this was talked a little bit about in the last presentation about the 101 of how you have inline malware protections either through CrowdStrike or Cylance with the bit class CASB, or you have inline DLP, simple patterns, advanced patterns, exact match, fingerprinting, and file metadata. And I think if you really investigate the DLP here, it has Boolean logic available with your regular expressions. So you can really get a fine-grained approach to your DLP so that you're not having a lot of false positives. And I think that's really the essence. And they also have, the API only for MIME and file type size. That'll help. So I think I'm going to stop here to take a quick breather if there's any questions or anything anybody wants to ask, and we'll go from there.
John, we have a couple of questions. The first question is, with so many groups involved, how did they navigate these different functional groups?
Well, I think the hardest part for any company is, and I'll go back a few slides here, is when you're defining the operational requirements. When you're doing this is just an outline of kind of a basic security set. You also have to, have that done for your application. What are you hoping to accomplish with the application being moved to the cloud? Is it global access because you have multiple AD groups? I mean, we have one company that this particular client has 7, for us, because they've grown by acquisition. They have 52 different AD groups, and you get into this IDP problem across that. So the fundamental way to make it work is to really write out a requirements document from the go of what your expectation is and what you want, and then you have to get a champion or whoever your advocate is within each of those departments to assist you to do that. I mean, I think that's the hardest part. And then it becomes a scheduling challenge because, you have, pick a number, any one of 8 to 20 or 30 people that have to be involved in these. And for this particular engagement, what we did is we set up a standing meeting twice a week, every Tuesday and Thursday. We had an 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. And if stuff on your punch list wasn't on the agenda for that day, then you didn't need to participate. But everybody knew and had that as a tentative standing meeting for the 6 months that it took to do this deployment. And I think that's, the buy-in is the hardest part, because you just have so many different people that have an opinion. And when you define your requirements and you start going through it, you'll find that these groups all have to comply because this doesn't work. This doesn't work. It's not practical. It's too expensive. Everything about it. So good question.
A follow-on question to that is, do you think IT teams or security teams should be organized differently because of the adoption of the SASE, or adjust for some of the redesigns this is bringing to the enterprise?
Absolutely. And I'll tell you the fundamental flaw that exists today in corporate IT is you don't have, what do I call it? You don't have practicality in deployment. And what I mean by that is if you take a guy that's a DNS ADFS guy, that's all he knows. He's never deployed a server. He's never deployed a firewall. And because you don't have this cross-pollination and everybody's siloed, they're an expert in their one domain, that it gets hard to get this kind of 40,000 foot architectural view that you need to do this lift and shift migration. And I don't want to knock some of the authoritative bodies, the ISACA and SSCM and all these other bodies that give people SASEs and all these other things, but there's a difference between being a textbook SISA and being a SISA that has practical experience and somebody that's actually, and I don't think they should give these certifications to people. Like you can earn a CISSP and having never deployed a firewall. And until you've actually gone through and done these deployments, it gets hard to really understand the nuts and bolts and the actual rule setting and things that need to happen to make it operational. So I 100% think that the ISO office needs to be built on teams of people that have practical experience because they understand what it takes to do a migration. They understand what it takes to do a deployment. And I think that's fundamentally missing in most of corporate America today.
All right, and then we have two more questions. Staying with some of these changes, the question is a process being outlined here something that would also be used for a customer who has realized they need to support more remote coverage because of global health concerns, and also in general, just being able to tolerate adjustments to how work is executed? There's a little more. Many customers are coming in with a how do I get moved as soon as possible type of mentality, but require some planned process to get there cleanly, as they want to fix what they said in a timeline that's not reasonable. So the question is, could this, what's being outlined here, could it be for someone that also just wants to get there as soon as possible because of remote workers, either because of 2020 or how they're made up?
Well, so there's this, and I had this discussion with a prospect yesterday. We had this exact conversation. And they're like, well, I want to move 500 of my Office 365 workers to the CASB, and then I want to move another 500, and I want to move another 500, and I want to do it in stages. Unfortunately, by the nature of the product and the nature of the technology, no, you have to do an application at a time, even though you may be able to, phase in the approach through AD groups. And I think one of the fundamental underpinnings that's missing in corporate IT today is they don't have solid foundations. And what I mean by that is their AD, their LDAP, their ADFS, whatever they're using for their identity is not clean, and it's not structured properly. It's not there's not enough hierarchy in it. And that really prevents a lot of the things that people want to do quickly because they're not done right. If your LDAP and your house is in order with your ADFS, with your firewall rules, with your VPN, with your AD groups, with your Radius server, if all of that stuff is in order, shifting to the cloud ASAP is a piece of cake. If your application supports SAML or OAuth, then yeah, it's a piece of cake. But if the house isn't in order, that's a really hard thing to do. And I caution, that's where people get into trouble as they try to rush the process because they don't have good underpinnings. And I think that historically is where projects fail. And then people get aggravated because it didn't work out of the gate. To make it work out of the gate, you should be able to turn on the CASB and not have any hiccups or problems if you set everything up in your test environment properly and you went through the, did your homework and did the steps. And I think that really is the essence that's missing. And it's kind of one of my soapboxes, because I hear it all the time. We don't have budget for that, and we don't have time for that. We need it done in 90 days. Well, great. You can't have speed product. You just got to pay. And, you got to pay a team to come in, fix your AD, pay a team to come in and fix this, and, facilitate that so that it is easy. But the concepts seem easy out of the gate, but when you get in the weeds of the practicality, you can't rush it. You have to architect it. You have to take the time to put the steps in there, and you have to know the gotchas or the what ifs through your testing to know where your hiccups are going to be.
All right, and then we have one last question, which I think takes us back to the last slide you were showing, which is, can you share some good examples of Boolean logic relevant to this?
I did not actually post any good ones, but the admin actually, well, we could pull up the admin guide, has some great examples of the Boolean logic patterns. Most of our work is under NDA, so we can't share the customers' regular expressions.
No, that's okay. And
or John, did you just want a free lesson today?
No, that I'm asking on behalf of someone else. But how about we take that one, and whoever presented that, reach out to Big Class, and we'd love to go through.
Yeah, no, that's definitely one we can help with, and there are a lot of patterns and ways to do this. And when you get into those regular expressions with some good Boolean logic, you really have to define what the end goal is and what false positives you're trying to prevent against. And that's kind of a hunt and peck for each company based on that. The other piece that we really didn't talk about to that end with DLP is, when I was saying earlier about people getting their house in order, is I'm amazed at some of the multinationals that I deal with that don't have proper meta tags for their documents in what is confidential, what's secure, what's super secure, what's secret, what's top secret. They just don't exist. They have public consumption and a file. They have 2-3 categories. That's it. And if you're going to implement DLP, I highly, highly, highly stress that you start getting a proper tagging system into your document management system so that, you can use DLP effectively. I mean, that's one of the biggest sticking points is, something that's for the board of directors and the CIO and the CEO and the COO and the CISO and the C-suite shouldn't be able to be downloaded by, John Q user. And we don't see that happening too often. We find that is also lacking in people getting your house in order to do this, because if that's in order, you don't have a lot of issues with DLP and the fingerprinting, watermarking, and some of the other advanced features that Big Glass offers, which we didn't even get into. Those features are so enhanced when you do have proper underpinnings. Is my buzzword of the day. Fix your house, right? Get it on proper foundation.
Well, John, a couple more questions have come in, but you know what? I'm going to let you proceed on the presentation, and we might come back to this slide.
Yeah. No, I got one more, and that was just, what ended up happening is, when you do this migration, you end up basically with the standard, SASE architectural summary. So whether you're coming in from IaaS, a SaaS, a private cloud, unsanctioned apps, it all gets protected with the CASB. And that's the neat thing about the CASB. And in this example that I just went through with this customer, we had 2,500 users were using the traditional reverse proxy. We had 100 users that needed the forward proxy because of licensing requirements within the corporation and the way that they operated. And then we also used the API. So in that particular case, we used all 3 versions of the product. The other thing is when you're deploying it, and I'll go back up a slide here, and you start looking at the other thing that I didn't put on here because it's kind of not, it is SASE, but it's not SASE, is, you know, in your CASB cloud, you need to put in something like a WAF, and you need to have something like a firewall, and the same for your users. And those things can all restrict traffic to authenticate your SAML IDPs and your MFA so that you know the authentication source that it's coming from. And so, you know, I didn't get into a lot of detail about some of the integrations that need to happen, but that's a, you know, we're running low on time, and that's another topic that we can get into more deeply. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer those. But if you think about it from whatever you're running today, you know, with the SASE architecture from BitClass, you know, you can get it accomplished. So, more questions, and if you need to reach me, there's my email address, and I'm happy to take any questions and work with you guys.
And by the way, if people are just joining, we're in SASE 201 with John Moran. We still have time, and so there's still questions. I want to be able to ask those.
Yeah, go ahead.
So go back to slide 11. There was a question on how does one make trade-off decisions on malware protection at the endpoint versus SASE, and are there trade-offs?
So when you're talking about a trade-off, I'm not suggesting that there's two trade-offs, right? It's called money and protection, right? So the inline malware protection is an add-on to the SASE product. So that becomes a function of cost and money. A trade-off in time is negligible because it's funding through the same stream. You know, maybe a little more clarification on what the trade-off is. I mean, you do have, you know, some sort of Symantec, or, you know, most companies have some sort of endpoint product, whether it's FireEye or even Cylance, CrowdStrike, or whatever. But what this does is protects the upload and download material and filters it as it's going through it's just an added layer of security, and it's this, I don't see it as a trade-off. It's just a trade-off of money for additional protections, and whether your company values that or not. And so, you know, I don't see it as being a real trade-off. I kind of see it as a mandatory. But
so another question about the architecture change that was shown earlier, and that is, are on-premise components eventually phased out, or where is this going for either a real use case or what you see in general?
Well, you know, I get that question a lot, and it depends on what you're talking about. And, you know, one of the things that everybody wants to get rid of is their on-premise firewall. Let's use that as an example. And fundamentally, what we see is you should keep your on-premise firewall. And the reason is you need to change it from the concept of being a firewall to being a router with firewall capabilities, and, you know, protect your east-west traffic within your own corporate network. And that gets back into a little bit of what, you know, the previous speaker, Evgeny, was talking about microsegmentation. And when you get into microsegmentation and separating all of the components and all of the, you know, just separating your network into, you know, a gazillion networks or VLANs, and you isolate those, then I don't see that the on-prem stuff is going to go away, right? You're still going to have printers, you're still going to have Wi-Fi access points, you're still going to have an ISP, connectivity to the internet from your corporate office. So no, I don't see it going away. From the server side, I see that going away. I don't think people are going to host, you know, servers in the data center anymore. But from an on-prem network perspective, you're still going to have access points. You're still going to have, you know, and at some point, maybe 3 to 5 years from now, as 5G evolves and it becomes more, they figure out how to get it through brick walls and, all these other things, you'll see 5G taking over. And then I believe it'll become an IPv6 battle where you'll start locking all your IPv6 devices and whitelisting all your IPv6 devices across the enterprise. So I think it's in the next 2 to 3 years, I don't see on-prem going away. From a server side, 100% I see it going away. From an application side, yeah, everybody's going to go to SaaS or IaaS. But if you look at a lot of the SaaS offerings and you can pick the big vendor, many multinationals cannot use a SaaS offering. They have way too many customizations. They've customized the app to the nth degree that a SaaS version isn't going to work. SaaS version is great for the mid-market. It's great for the SMB, SME enterprise. But a company with 100,000 users is going to use a SaaS version? Highly unlikely. And if they do, they're going to have other applications or other things to make it work for their business. People don't want to disrupt their business process to fit an application. They want their application to fit their business process. And I think that's fundamentally where the rubber meets the road with that.
Thank you. So I got a couple of comments, questions that I'm going to combine. There was an acknowledgement that, a lot of organizations are reactively realizing they should have been doing steps sooner. But that leads to a different question is, what really should be tackled first if right now we're looking at a mostly on-prem or monolithic architecture?
If you have a monolithic architecture and that application is working through VPN, I would start with your Active Directory. Because once you fix your Active Directory, if your groups and your OUs and all the subcategories of your AD are complete, then you can lift and shift your monolithic application to an AWS workload. Although I'll caution, because I'm a capacity planner, most companies don't properly capacity plan for monolithic applications because, they don't understand the concept of, hey, I just added 22 CPUs because I needed it. And, you have to probably properly design it up front. And then that move becomes a piece of cake if your users and, with a proper SASE. If you have a bit class SASE with an IDP and your app supports your monolithic app, most of those can have some sort of Apache front end written to be SAML compliant for authentication. You can kind of trick the application's front end for login and authentication by rewriting some Apache web page or Python scripts or something. You can write something to do the authentication piece. You can run a front end for that. And once that's done, make that SAML compliant. Use the bit class IDP to log into your ADP, and away you go. And I think I would say that's probably the easiest approach.
Okay. I still have a few more questions. Somebody asked whether we'll be sharing a recording of the session. Absolutely. We'll have more details on that after we get through the day. Another question, I don't know if this is a softball for the two of us or not, but it's, do you have a recommendation on which of these functions can be converged with a single vendor, given there are so many functions?
Well,
let's one. Go ahead.
Well, no, but I mean, when you're talking about, when you're talking about a single vendor, right? And this goes back to, the SASE architecture, there is no universal single vendor that's going to solve all your problems, right? Let's just start with that. I mean, nobody, whether it's IBM or Cisco or anybody, no single vendor is going to solve all your problems because they don't have all the tools you need. What I can tell you is, in the security world, from our experience in integrating you know, Checkpoint, BitGlass, you know, pick a company, you know, the BitGlass product, and we've tested them all. We've tested, you know, the other competitors to BitGlass. We found that BitGlass was universally the most flexible to work in conjunction with the other security products. And so when you look at it in terms of, you know, there's so many features and so many functionalities, yeah, but here, if you look at it from this perspective, they're all add-ons and they're all additional capabilities, right? And so, you know, to separate out DLP to a second vendor or malware protection or whatever, you're going to be routing traffic all over the world. And I think that's where we found that the BitGlass solution has the proper mix of products in the space to cover most of the needs that you need. I mean, you're still going to need an on-premise firewall. We still recommend you have some sort of cloud guard or cloud firewall. We still recommend, you know, some sort of WAF if you have, you know, an application that you're trying to protect on the cloud. I mean, there's a lot of other things you need. And what I can tell you is, as a deployment and project management specialist for this stuff, we found BitGlass to be the most flexible, whether you need a reverse proxy, whether you need a forward proxy, whether you need a API. All of those integrations have led us to select BitGlass as the best. And the product only gets better with time. So John, maybe you can add your 2 cents to that.
Well, the amount of functionality that BitGlass has put into one admin dashboard is fantastic. It's completely integrated. You're not putting a bunch of products together and jumping from one administrative interface to another. And so if you're not aware of that, please call John, call ourselves, let us show you. Okay, another question. Another question is, now we're going to get into a little more, well, actually, the methodology that was used with this customer. And forgive me, I don't know these methodologies, but did you use fall or agile, or what methodology do you think works best when doing a SASE project?
Whatever one gives you the most patience and understanding. No, I think, you know, in this particular customer, we use the Azure DevOps as our foundation, and then just kind of created a, you know, a task. We actually use this, I don't want to say it's a hokey product, a pretty good little product. We use this thing called Miro board, which is one of 100 products, and you can pick whatever you're kind of comfortable with. For, you know, each corporate has their own approach as to what works best from a project management perspective. But we tend to be more simplistic in our approach and don't specifically call it a agile development, a free fall, or, you know, Scrum, whatever you want to do. I mean, typically we break things like a Scrum type model where, you know, you're kind of building 2 weeks at a time and doing that. It depends on your CI/CD. You know, every company has their own approach for this. In this particular instance, we use the Jenkins and a CI/CD platform to auto build and create kind of our golden AMI images for the deployment. So I don't know, hope that answers your question. And
so then, bigger picture, I'm going to combine 2 questions. Questions are, what do you see as the impact on budgets? Or to put it a different way, how is this customer measuring success for this?
Wow. Okay. Budget.
Or how should a customer measure for success?
Well, I think success goes back to, first of all, you can't, and this was the hardest part, and we're still fighting this battle with this particular customer. As we grow the you know, as we grow the enterprise, into the cloud, right? So we're still having this battle, and the fundamental battle is this: we have yet to find a multinational that can actually put a cost structure, including soft costs, on their monolithic applications. We've yet to see it. Nobody can say it costs me $1.18 per transaction to run this. And then you start asking questions. Well, does that include this? And does that include that? And does that include this? And that, and that's where you get into, you know, there's going to be a whole new level of accounting that's going to need to happen with the cloud, because you're going from a CapEx model where, hey, we need you know, $2 million worth of hardware this year to do a server refresh, and you know, we need 80 million switches, and oh, we need 8 million disk drives. And you know, when you start breaking that down from a capital cost and you start operationalizing it, the costs become pretty clear pretty fast, because you're getting a bill every month from Amazon that's going to tell you it's X dollars, and yet that still doesn't include all your soft costs. So this particular customer, I don't want to say was doing it out of spite, but the application team was tired of the excessive internal charges for network use, for server use, and for any little thing they needed done. So they said, for our budget, if we move this to the cloud, we'll save money versus the internal charges that our business units getting whacked. And so they did it just to be rogue. Number one, they did it because they wanted more control. They didn't want to put a ticket in and wait 6 weeks for a ticket to get responded to. And it just turned into, you know, I don't know how many ladies are on the call, but it just turned into a testosterone fight between the IT team and the application team. And so success in this case was they wanted more autonomy. And I think by giving the moving it to the cloud and controlling their own control tower or landing zone, whatever you're using, by controlling their own landing zone and environment, I think they felt that they were getting more control and better self-service models for their application, so that their users could get updates and application moves done much quicker. So from back to the budget perspective, I think if you are removing your VPN, I mean, everybody, you can look up what your VPN license costs, but I think if you break apart your VPN license cost and your network traffic costs, you'll find that BitGlass is a wash. So it's really just a budget shift. It's not a budget reduction. And it may be in some cases a budget reduction, depending on, you know, how your costs are structured and what your network team charges back your business unit for the case. And the only way to fix that is to do a proper capacity plan, you know, and run your application through and say, you know, hey, how many megabytes am I doing? And, you know, kind of doing a lot of math on that. And we have templates for that. So.
Okay. I'm sure there's great productivity improvements as you shorten some of the things that are needed.
Well, it is. I mean, it really becomes, you know, it really becomes, you know, the cloud becomes reducing latency for all the users is really what it becomes. And when you reduce the latency and, you know, you start talking about cutting a latency in half or a third or a quarter, you know, it doesn't seem like a lot, but when you start talking about 1 second, 2 seconds for every, you know, we did a math for a customer and, you know, they had 150,000 users, and you start saying 2 seconds on every screen refresh, not screen refresh per se, but like, let's say every file, every 1 meg PDF they uploaded or downloaded, and they do that 7 times a day. You're talking 14 seconds a day times 100,000, you know, users times, you know, and you start doing the math, you end up losing 2, 3, 4 man years of labor just in waiting. That is, I call it white time. It just, nobody thinks about it. And then if it becomes 10 or 20 seconds that people have to wait to download a 2 or 3 meg PDF because of the latency, then people go get a cup of coffee. And then there's so much hidden costs and soft costs that you lose as a company times your 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 users. It's just a huge soft cost that's just gone.
Well, I'm going to ask you one more specific question, and then I think we're going to wrap it up. But specific question, what data sources were going into the SIM? What did they do with that reporting? Any comments you want to make on reporting with Big Glass?
Well, I think the logs will give you, there's a checkbox when you go to set up the reporting, right? And you ask what data you want. But the bit glass, the native logs that come out of it, with the time stamping down to the second and everything, all of those things are going into the SIM, into the Splunk, help the ISO office, obviously do their work. I will tell you there are a lot of other things you can do. I don't know how many people are international on this for a GDPR perspective, but Big Glass does have the option to, check a box so that you get only a transaction ID and you don't get the user name and login as part of your alerting so that you can be GDPR compliant. I think that's one of the important things to really think about in this logging and who has access to those logs. There are plenty of people, using, I think Splunk has become kind of the de facto. And I think, you just have to customize your Splunk to give you the data sets and the data points that you're looking for.
Fantastic. Well, John, thank you for your time. Thank you for
You're
your
very welcome.
insights. We are going to move next to SASE and digital transformation in a remote world. Actually, Kevin, the next.
John, a slight correction.
Yeah, thank you.
Going into the executive panel right after this.
And so we'll do that at the top of the hour, right?
Yes. So we'll take a short 10-minute break or so, and we'll be back to have the executive panel. Thanks, everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John.
You're very welcome.